So we are on page 168, about a third of the way down. This chapter we have been exploring the relationship between Ron, Hermione and Harry a lot more. It's showing their relationships and how they feel towards each other. And once again we see Neville forgetting what to do and sleeping on the floor. So that's helping me. Hearing about Neville reminds me to what I've predicted and inferred from him so far. Ron looked at his watch and then glared furiously at Hermione and Neville. If either of you get us caught, I'll never rest until I've learnt that curse of the bogey's quirrell. I'll never rest until I've learnt that curse of the bogey's quirrell told us about and used it on you. Hermione opened her mouth, perhaps to tell Ron exactly how to use the curse of the bogies, but Harry hissed at her to be quiet and beckoned them all forward. They flitted along corridors with bars of moonlight from the high windows. At every turn, Harry expected to run into Filch or Mrs. Norris, but they were lucky. They sped up a staircase to the third floor and tiptoed towards the trophy room. Malfoy and Crabbe weren't there yet. The crystal trophy cases glimmered where the moonlight had caught them. Cups, shields, plates and statues winked silver and gold in the darkness. They edged along the walls, keeping their eyes on the doors at either end of the room. Harry took his wand out, in case. Malfoy leapt in and started at once. The minutes crept by. He's late. Maybe he's chickened out, Ron whispered. Then a noise in the next room made them jump. Harry had only just raised his wand when they heard someone speak. And it wasn't Malfoy. Sniff around, my sweet. They might be lurking in the corner. It was Filch speaking to Mrs. Norris. Horror-struck, Harry waved madly at the other three to follow him as quickly as possible. They scurried silently towards the door, away from Filch's voice. Neville's robes had barely whipped around the corner when they heard Filch enter the trophy room. They're hiding in there somewhere, they heard him mutter. Probably hiding. This way, Harry mouthed to the others, and petrified, they began to creep down a long gallery full of suits of armour. They could hear Filch getting nearer. Suddenly, Neville let out a frightened squeak and broke into a run. He tripped, grabbed Ron around the waist, and the pair of them toppled right into a suit of armour. The clanging and crashing were enough to wake up the whole castle. Run! Harry yelled, and the four of them sprinted down the gallery, not looking back to see whether Filch was following. They swung around the doorpost and galloped down one corridor, then another. Harry in the lead without any idea where they were or where they were going. They ripped through a tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passage, hurtled along and came out near their charms classroom, which they knew was miles from the trophy room. I think we'd lost him, Harry panted, leaning against the cold wall and wiping his forehead. Neville was bent double, wheezing and spluttering. I told you, Hermione gasped, clutching at the stitch in her chest. I told you! We've got to get back to Gryffindor Tower, said Ron, quickly as possible. Malfoy tricked you, Hermione said to Harry. You realise that, don't you? He was never going to meet you. Filch knew someone was going to be in the trophy room. Malfoy must have tipped him off. Harry thought she was probably right, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Let's go. It wasn't going to be that simple. They hadn't gone more than a dozen paces when a doorknob rattled and something came shooting out of the classroom in front of them. It was Peeves. He caught sight of them and gave a squeal of delight. Shut up, Peeves! Please, you'll get us thrown out! Peeves cackled. Wandering around at midnight, ickle firsties? Tut, 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 naughty, naughty, you'll get caughty. Not if you don't give us away, Peeves, please. Should tell Filch, I should, said Peeves in a saintly voice, but his eyes glittered wickedly. It's for your own good, you know. Get out of the way, snapped Ron, taking a swipe at Peeves. This was a big mistake. Students out of bed! Peeves bellowed. Students out of bed, down the charms corridor. Ducking under Peeves, they ran for their lives right to the end of the corridor, where they slammed into a door, and it was locked. This is it, Ron moaned as they pushed helplessly at the door. We're done for. This is the end. They could hear footsteps, Filch running as fast as he could towards Peeves' shouts. Oh, move over, Hermione snarled. She grabbed Harry's wand, tapped the lock and whispered, Alohomora. The clock clicked and the door swung open. They piled through it, shut it quickly, and pressed their ears against it, listening. "Which way did they go, Peeves?" Filch was saying. "Quick, tell me." "Say please." "Don't mess me about, Peeves. Now where did they go?" "Shan't say nothing if you don't say please," said Peeves in his annoying sing-song voice. "All right, Pleeves." "Nothing, ha! Told you I wouldn't say anything if you didn't say please, ha ha, ha ha ha." And they heard the sound of Peeves whooshing away and Filch cursing in rage. "He thinks this door is locked," Harry whispered. "I think we'll be okay. Get off, Neville." For Neville had been tugging on the sleeve of Harry's dressing gown for the last minute. "What?" Harry turned around and saw, quite clearly, what. For a moment he was sure he'd walked into a nightmare. This was too much on top of everything else that had happened so far. They weren't in a room, as he had supposed. They were in a corridor. The forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor. And now they knew why it was forbidden. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog. A dog which filled the whole space between the ceiling and the floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling, mad eyes, 3 noses twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them, and Harry knew that the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken it by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob. Between Filch and death, he'd take Filch. Which would you take? Filch with Mrs. Norris or the 3-headed dog? Think about which one you would rather battle to survive to live another day. They fell backwards. Harry slammed the door shut and they ran. They almost flew back down the corridor. Filch must have hurried off to look for them somewhere else because they didn't see him anywhere, but they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was put as much space as possible between them and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the 7th floor. So, they were in the corridor on the 3rd floor they weren't allowed to go to, and they've made it to the 7th floor. So they have run 4 floors. Imagine the exhaustion. "Where on earth have you all been?" she asked, looking at their dressing gowns hanging off their shoulders and their flushed, sweaty faces. "Never mind that. Pig snout! Pig snout!" panted Harry, and the portrait swung forward. They scrambled into the common room and collapsed, trembling, into armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville, indeed, looked as if he'd never speak again. "What do you think they're doing, keeping a thing like that locked up in a school?" said Ron finally. "If any dog needs exercise, that one does." Hermione had got both her breath and her bad temper back again. "You don't use your eyes, any of you, do you?" she snapped. "Didn't you see what it was standing on?" "The floor?" Harry suggested. "I wasn't looking at its feet. I was too busy with its heads." "No, not the floor. It was standing on a trapdoor. It's obviously guarding something." She stood up, glaring at them. "I hope you're pleased with yourselves. We could have all been killed, or worse, expelled. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to bed." Now, have a quick think. They could have been killed, or worse, expelled. Which of the two could possibly be worse in your eyes? Ron stared after her, his mouth open. "No, we don't mind," he said. "You think we dragged her along, wouldn't you?" But Hermione had given Harry something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. The dog was guarding something. What had Hagrid said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something you wanted to hide, except perhaps Hogwarts. It looked as though Harry had found out where the grubby little package from Vault 713 was. And that is the end of chapter 9. So we have so far read 174 pages. I hope you have been working along with me, thinking as I ask questions, paying attention when I've been demonstrating my comprehension skills, paying attention when I reread or noticing that I have to reread, because as I say, it shows a good reader will pick up when they've made a mistake and reread it instead of continuing on, because I might miss valuable pieces of information or evidence when I'm reading if I just keep on going, if I'm not paying attention. So it is so important to comprehend. Can you please do that chapter summary? Just 2 or 3 sentences in your head about what has happened in chapter 9. The other thing I want you to start thinking about is during a book, during any story that is written, there is generally a major conflict or drama. There is a big issue that has the big resolution towards the end of the story. We keep reading a text because we are getting involved in the conflict that is happening and we want to find out how it ends. That's one of the reasons we keep reading. We want to find out how it all happens. Throughout the book, though, generally in each chapter, there will be small issues that arise, small conflicts that by the end of most chapters, they have been resolved. So I know in the broomstick chapter, which was chapter 8, one of the conflicts was Malfoy taking the Remembrall and flying off with it. So he and Harry had the argument. So there was the conflict, stealing the Remembrall, and then Harry solved it because he got the Remembrall back. Then there was the issue, the conflict that he was going to be expelled, or that's what he thought would happen. And then the outcome was he'd actually joined the Quidditch team. So in your head as you read, you can kind of map a graph that shows the conflict going up, and then when it is resolved, it comes down. The next conflict, it is resolved. And it is all heading towards that big issue, that big conflict, the main issue of the story, that it will peak. And it might still do little ones, but it still hasn't actually solved that one until generally right near the end of the story. Quite often in a text, especially in a book that has sequels, it may introduce a new conflict which won't actually be dealt with until the next part of the series of books. So on that, I will leave you. I've done lots of talking at the end, so I will see you back for chapter 10. Bye!